So how do we even begin to teach history? I mean, especially to children, without it just feeling like this overwhelming flood of dates and names. Can simplicity actually bring clarity to something as huge and complex as the human past?
That is a really profound challenge, isn't it? And it's exactly what E.H. Gombrich tackled, I think, so brilliantly in A Little History of the World.
Ah, the book.
Yes, the book. He originally wrote it back in 1935 for young readers in German. And what makes it so special is that conversational, almost story-like approach. It starts right off with, once upon a time.
Just like a fairy tale, but for, well, everything. And that's really our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To journey through the book with you, our listeners, explore how Gombrich pulls it off, taking us from the absolute earliest times right up to his own life.
Exactly, extracting those really important nuggets of knowledge and insight.
Right. And we want to dig into why his approach, this unique, accessible way of looking at history, still feels so relevant and, frankly, so refreshing today.
Well, he starts in such an interesting way that once upon a time isn't just for show. He uses it as this invitation to think about the sheer immensity of the past.
Like his analogy of standing between two mirrors.
Precisely. Seeing those endless reflections stretching away fainter and fainter. You never see the very last one, but you know they're there. It gives you this incredible feeling for deep time right from the start.
That's a fantastic way to visualize it. So, okay, as we peer into that deep past, what does Gombrich highlight first about our earliest ancestors? He mentions things like the Heidelberg jaw.
Yeah, massive, so strong.
And Neanderthal man. But what really seems to stand out in the book is his focus on their inventions.
Yes, the really pivotal early stuff. He really makes you imagine how incredibly hard it must have been to discover fire. I mean, without matches. Or just the slow, painstaking work of developing the first tools.
Which gives us the Stone Age, the Bronze Age.
Exactly, and those clever pile dwellings.
Yeah.
The huts built on stilts out in lakes for safety.
So what does this focus on basic invention tell us about how Gombrich sees human progress?
Well, there's this really powerful insight he offers right near the beginning. He says humans from, say, 3 to 10,000 years ago were fundamentally just like us.
Just like us. How so?
He points out they were, often unkind, cruel, and deceitful. But at the same time, a mother might sacrifice her life for her child, and friends might die for each other.
So the same mix of good and bad we see today.
Exactly. It's this core message that runs through the book, despite all the time that's passed. That fundamental human capacity for both good and evil, it doesn't really change. He asks us to remember them almost with gratitude, when we use a tool or warm ourselves by a fire.
Because our progress is built on their ingenuity. They were, as he puts it, the greatest inventors of all time. Okay, so from these really inventive early humans, Gombrich then takes us pretty quickly to the dawn of the first great civilizations, starting with Egypt, right? Around 3100 BC.
Yes, ancient Egypt. And he describes just the immense scale of things like King Cheops's pyramid, built around 2500 BC, veritable mountains of stone, and all without modern machines.
Mind-boggling.
It really is. And the book uses these massive structures to reflect the pharaoh's incredible power, but also the complexity of Egyptian religious beliefs. The Sphinx, the mummies, this idea that the soul needed the body to survive.
He even touches on resistance to change early on, doesn't he? With Akhenaten trying to introduce a single god, the sun god.
Right, and how the people really didn't like it. They pretty much went straight back to their old gods as soon as he was gone.
Yeah.
Show how deep-rooted beliefs can be.
So, while Egypt's focused on eternity, the book takes us eastward to Mesopotamia, Babylonians, Assyrians.
Yeah, and their legacy is quite different. Their art, for example, often shows kings in action, hunting lions, things like that. But what's really fascinating, as Gombrich points out, is their obsession with the stars.
Astrology's origins.
Exactly. They watch the stars meticulously, believing they influence human destiny. And this observation, this tracking, is apparently where our 7-day week comes from.
Really? How so?
Well, they dedicated a day to each of the 5 planets they knew, plus the sun and the moon. And we still have echoes of that, right? Saturday for Saturn, Sunday, Monday for the moon.
Wow, I never quite made that connection so clearly. And there's ziggurats, those towering temples.
They're observatories, essentially, built high, literally to be closer to the stars they were watching.
Okay, so from these huge empires with their gods and stars, the book then shifts focus to a really unique story. The journey of the Jews.
It's a distinct thread. Gombrich notes how different they were from their neighbors. While others worshipped many gods, these herdsmen prayed to just one god.
Monotheism.
Right, this distinct monotheism that really shaped their whole destiny. It's the faith that, as Gombrich explains, saw them through centuries of persecution, of exile, like the famous Babylonian captivity.
Where they were held for, what, nearly 50 years?
About that, yes. But their unique belief system created this strong cohesion, this identity that helped them endure even when they were scattered across different lands.
And then Greece.
Ah, Greece. Gombrich paints it as this incredibly dynamic, ever-changing culture, a real contrast to the maybe more rigid Eastern empires like Egypt or Persia.
How so? What does he emphasize?
Well, their art, for one. Sculptors like Phidias creating these figures of gods that weren't just powerful, but also embodied human beauty and, well, humanity, and their philosophy. Think of the Delphic Oracle, always giving these ambiguous answers that made people think, question.
Not just accept pronouncements.
Exactly, and of course the beginnings of democracy. But the book also draws this really vivid contrast within Greece itself.
You mean Sparta versus Athens?
Precisely. The Spartans disciplined, harsh upbringing, leaving weak babies out to die, beating boys to make them tough, all geared towards producing soldiers willing to die for their laws, like at Thermopylae.
Legendary discipline.
Absolutely. And then you have the Athenians who, as Gombrich puts it, were more concerned with living a meaningful life, leaving behind amazing art, plays, philosophy, political debate.
That's a fascinating contrast he sets up. Does he kind of suggest why he focuses on that difference? Is it a key to understanding the Greeks?
I think he implies that maybe understanding how to live a meaningful life, like the Athenians wrestled with, is maybe a more profound or at least a different kind of challenge than simply knowing how to die for a cause, which the Spartans mastered. It highlights a real tension in human values, I think.
That makes sense. A tension between duty and perhaps fulfillment. Okay, so from these ancient ideals and tensions, we move towards the rise of a very different kind of power, the Roman Empire. The book starts with the myths, Romulus and Remus.
The founding myths. And then it quickly moves to the Roman character. Disciplined, very practical, ambitious, known more for their laws and their legions than, say, original philosophy.
And their wars, the Punic Wars against Carthage, get quite a bit of attention in the book, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. It's a dramatic section. Gombrich really brings Hannibal's crossing of the Alps with war elephants to life. You can almost feel the cold and the struggle. It's an unbelievable feat.
Almost suicidal.
Almost. But the book also stresses the Roman response, their persistence, eventually winning under Scipio. And then there's Cato, the stern old senator.
The one who kept saying, Carthage must be destroyed.
That's him. Ending every speech with it, apparently. Cetrum censeo Carthaginem esse delendum. And eventually, they did just that. Razed the city completely in 146 BC. It shows that Roman tenacity, or maybe ruthlessness.
And that Roman determination, that practicality, it's also clear in their engineering, right? The roads and aqueducts.
Definitely. The book describes this amazing network of roads, beautifully paved, straight lines across plains, over mountains.
Built mainly for the army.
Primarily, yes, for moving troops and sending messages quickly. But of course, they ended up benefiting the whole empire, connecting everything, making trade easier, really cementing Roman control through infrastructure.
And then there are the key figures, Julius Caesar.
Ah, Caesar. Gombrich spotlights him effectively. That famous declaration, Veni Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, perfectly captures his speed, his military brilliance like in Gaul.
And he gave us the month of July.
He did indeed, and reformed the calendar. Then, after the chaos following Caesar's death, you get Augustus, the first real emperor.
How does Gombrich portray Augustus?
As renowned for fair and wise rule. Actually, the book mentions he was remarkably cool-headed. Apparently, he used to recite the alphabet silently to himself when he felt his temper rising, before making any decisions.
Huh, a useful trick.
Isn't it? And Augustus also had this deep appreciation for Greek art. He had loads of copies made for his palaces and gardens, which actually helped preserve many Greek originals, or at least their form, that might otherwise have been lost.
So from the structure and power of Rome, Gombrich then steers us towards something completely different, a shift in, well, belief itself.
Yes, perhaps the most profound shift described in the book. The birth of Christianity, right there during Augustus's reign in the Roman province of Palestine.
And what does Gombrich focus on regarding Jesus Christ's teachings?
The core messages, really. Infinite love, mercy, the equality of all people before God, this idea that everyone, rich or poor, Roman or barbarian, slave or free, is one of God's children.
A revolutionary idea at the time.
Absolutely. And the Apostle Paul's powerful message about love, that without love, even the greatest gifts, the greatest knowledge, prophecies, faith, they mean nothing. That resonates strongly in the book.
But this new belief system faced challenges, didn't it? Persecution?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
The book describes the early persecutions, particularly under Emperor Nero. He infamously blamed the Christians for the Great Fire of Rome,
Leading them to meet in secret in the catacombs.
Exactly. Those underground burial tunnels became meeting places. And around the same time, you have the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman general Titus in AD 70.
Which led to the diaspora.
Yes, the widespread dispersal of the Jews. Gombrich notes how, despite being scattered across the empire and beyond, they remained distinct, holding on to their customs, their laws, and patiently awaiting their Messiah.
And while Christianity was spreading, eventually becoming the dominant religion of the empire, another major faith emerges from a different desert.
Right. The book introduces Islam, rising from the Arabian desert. It starts with Muhammad's visions, the archangel Gabriel appearing to him, commanding him to read.
And his central teaching.
Submission to the will of God, which is, in fact, what the word Islam means in Arabic. A simple, powerful message of one God, Allah.
And the spread of Islam was incredibly rapid, wasn't it?
Astonishingly so. The book details the Arab conquests after Muhammad's death: Palestine, Persia, Egypt, North Africa, even into Spain. Very swift, very effective.
This section also includes the story about the Library of Alexandria being burned.
Yes, the famous and controversial story, attributed to the Caliph Omar, his supposed reasoning. If the books contained what was in the Quran, they were unnecessary. If they didn't, they were harmful, so burn them all. A very utilitarian, maybe even anti-intellectual viewpoint presented there.
But Gombrich balances that, right? He talks about the flourishing of Arab culture afterwards.
He does, crucially. He points out that while the initial conquests were destructive in some ways, the Arab civilization quickly absorbed knowledge from the peoples they conquered: Greeks, Persians, Indians. This led to huge advances, particularly in mathematics. Think of algebra. The word itself comes from Arabic, and in chemistry.
And they introduced paper to Europe.
Yes,
Yeah.
a seemingly small detail with enormous consequences. They learned papermaking from Chinese prisoners of war and brought it westward. Imagine the impact on learning and the spread of ideas once paper became more available than expensive parchment.
Okay, so we're moving out of the ancient world through the rise of these major religions and into the period often called the Dark Ages. But Gombrich has a different take, doesn't he?
He really does. He famously calls it not a dark age, but a starry night.
A starry night, what does he mean by that?
It's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
He acknowledges the darkness, the chaos, the destruction caused by the mass migrations, the Huns, the Vandals, figures like Attila the Hun, who is supposedly called the Scourge of God, leaving devastation in his wake.
So, acknowledging the turmoil.
Yes, but amidst that darkness, he says, the guiding light of a new faith, Christianity, shone through like stars. This faith brought new ideas like the potential end of slavery, the idea of a shared human dignity before God, that all souls were equal in God's eyes. It was this internal shift, this new way of thinking, that provided light in the darkness.
That's a much more nuanced view than just darkness. And who were the key players in preserving knowledge and spreading this faith during that time?
The monks, particularly the Benedictine monks, their motto was ora et labora, pray and work. And Gombrich highlights their absolutely crucial role. They weren't just praying, they were painstakingly copying ancient manuscripts, Greek, Latin texts, scientific works, farming manuals.
Saving them to the future.
Exactly, preserving huge amounts of knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. Plus, their monasteries became centers of learning, they provided education, offered shelter to travelers in pretty lawless times.
He tells that story about the monk Boniface too, doesn't he?
Yeah, chopping down the sacred oak tree dedicated to the god Odin, somewhere in Germania. A bold move, basically challenging the old pagan beliefs directly, showing the power of the new faith.
And socially, this era is characterized by the feudal system.
Right, that system of lords, vassals, knights, and serfs. Clear social divisions. Gombrich actually compares it, interestingly, to the ancient Indian caste system in terms of its rigidity.
But it also gave rise to the ideal of chivalry.
Yes, the code of the knight. A knight's duty wasn't just fighting. It was meant to include protecting the weak, upholding justice and honor, being courteous, particularly to women, and even engaging in poetry and song. Think of the legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, the quest for the Holy Grail. Those ideals stem from this period.
But Gombrich doesn't romanticize it completely. He points out the darker side too.
No, he's quite clear about that. He mentions the Crusades, for instance. While undertaken with pious motives, supposedly, he describes the brutal atrocities committed by some crusaders, like the massacre of Muslims and Jews when they captured Jerusalem. A stark reminder that high ideals don't always prevent horrific violence.
A recurring theme, perhaps. So from the Starry Night and the complexities of the Middle Ages, the book then brings us to Florence and the Renaissance.
Ah, the Renaissance.
Yeah.
Literally rebirth.
Yeah.
But Gombrich presents it as much more than just rediscovering ancient Greece and Rome. He talks about it as a fundamental shift in how people saw the world.
A new delight in things.
Exactly. A new delight in the world itself, in talented individuals and beautiful things. People started looking at ancient ruins not just as old stones, but as things of beauty and inspiration. Artists started looking at nature, at people, with fresh eyes, trying to paint them realistically, vibrantly. Real flourishing of art, ideas, and sort of confident humanism.
And the ultimate Renaissance man, according to the book, Leonardo da Vinci.
Has to be Leonardo, doesn't it? Gombrich highlights his incredible range, his revolutionary approach to understanding anatomy by actually dissecting human bodies, quite shocking at the time.
And his designs for flying machines, way ahead of his time.
Centuries ahead. And the book points out those fascinating secret notebooks he kept, written in mirror script, including the absolutely groundbreaking idea that the sun does not move, the earth goes around the sun.
Copernicus hadn't even published yet.
Exactly. And Leonardo kept this, and designs for things like submarines or diving suits hidden. Why? Gombrich notes Leonardo's fear of heresy, but also his fear that his inventions could be used for destruction because, as Leonardo apparently wrote, men are wicked and would use it to kill. Sobering thought.
Wow. So Leonardo kept his most revolutionary ideas secret. But what happens when other revolutionary ideas or technologies do get out, like the printing press?
Ah, the printing press. A game changer. The book really emphasizes its profound impact. Suddenly, ideas could spread like wildfire. Think of Martin Luther and the Reformation.
His criticisms of the church.
Yes. His 95 Theses, his translations of the Bible, his pamphlets vigorous, often coarse but powerful. Thanks to printing, they were read all across Germany and then Europe in weeks. It fundamentally challenged the established church authority in a way that wouldn't have been possible before. It fueled the Protestant movement, reshaping the religious and political map of Europe.
And another invention that changed things dramatically, gunpowder.
Right. Another import, originally from China, brought via the Arabs. The book points out that, despite being initially quite clumsy, slow to load, inaccurate gunpowder eventually meant the end of the knight in shining armor.
The end of chivalry, in a way.
In a practical sense, yes. What good was heavy, expensive armor when a simple peasant with an arquebus, a primitive gun, could potentially strike down a noble knight from a distance? It shifted the balance of power on the battlefield and, consequently, in society, technology disrupting old structures again.
And this era of change also includes the age of exploration, Columbus.
The book frames Columbus's voyage in 1492 quite clearly. He was trying to reach the Indies, East Asia, by sailing west. He made a mistake, a profound geographical error, and accidentally bumped into America, a mistake that literally reshapes the world map.
But the consequences for the people already living in the Americas were devastating.
Absolutely horrific. Gombrich does not mince words here. He talks about the behavior of the Spanish conquistadores, figures like Hernando Cortez in Mexico, Pizarro in Peru. He calls the extermination of the indigenous peoples appalling and shameful.
And there were economic consequences back in Europe, too, all that gold.
Yes. The huge influx of gold and silver from the Americas, plus wealth from trade routes to India, poured into Europe. But it didn't benefit everyone equally. The book explains how it massively enriched the merchants and burghers in the port cities, Spain, Portugal, later France, England, Holland, while the old landed nobility, the knights, often found themselves relatively poor. Power shifted towards the Atlantic coast, towards commerce.
So massive changes, religious, technological, geographical, economic. This leads us into the next major period. Gombrich covers the Enlightenment, around 1700 onward.
That's right, the Enlightenment. And Gombrich explains its core idea, using the pure light of reason to combat ignorance, superstition, and prejudice. There was this renewed focus on rational thinking, looking back to the Greeks and Romans for inspiration, but also embracing new scientific methods.
Figures like Galileo.
Exactly, using experiment, observation, proofs, trying to understand nature's laws, which Galileo saw as a kind of mathematical magic. And the key implication of reason, as Gombrich points out, is that if reason is universal, then all human beings capable of reason must be, in some fundamental way, equal and possess certain rights.
And did these Enlightenment ideals, tolerance, reason, humanity, actually change society?
Oh yes. The book details some really tangible impacts, things we might take for granted now but were revolutionary then. The gradual end of judicial torture, the stopping of witchcraft trials. Gombrich notes the last conviction in England was in 1712. The abolition of serfdom in many places. A growing recognition of equal rights for all citizens before the law. Even the beginnings of questioning the inequality of women.
These sound like hugely positive changes, but Enlightenment ideals also fueled revolution.
Indeed. The ideals of liberty and equality clashed dramatically with the old order, particularly in France. Gombrich describes the buildup. The incompetence and extravagance of kings like Louis XI and Louis XVI, the growing discontent culminating in the French Revolution.
The storming of the Bastille in 1789.
That iconic moment. And the revolutionary cry, liberty, equality, fraternity, powerful ideals. But the book starkly contrasts this with the brutal reality that followed the Reign of Terror.
Led by figures like Danton and Robespierre.
Yes, who in the name of virtue and defending the revolution, justified widespread executions by guillotine. Thousands were killed, often on flimsy accusations. It's a chilling example of how revolutionary fervor can turn tyrannical.
And rising out of this chaos, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon. The book captures his meteoric rise, from an obscure Corsican officer to Emperor of France. His military genius is undeniable. Gombrich highlights battles like Austerlitz.
And his impact beyond the battlefield, the Napoleonic Code.
Yes, his system of laws, which influenced legal systems across Europe and beyond. And his conquests redrew the map of Europe. He even dissolved the Holy Roman Empire, which had existed in one form or another for 1,000 years.
But his ambition ultimately led to his downfall, the Russian campaign.
The disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812, his huge grand army was decimated by the Russian winter, starvation, and relentless attacks. The book portrays it as the beginning of the end for him, leading eventually to Waterloo and exile.
So after the upheavals of revolution and Napoleon, what's the next major shift Gombrich identifies?
The Industrial Revolution. This is another profound transformation, driven not by politics or war, but by technology. Inventions that changed everyday life completely.
Like the steam engine.
James Watt perfecting the steam engine, yes. Robert Fulton's steamboat, Samuel Morse's electric telegraph connecting the world instantly, mechanical looms revolutionizing textile production. The book emphasizes how humans were suddenly harnessing the forces of nature, steam, electricity on an unprecedented scale, moving from manpower and animal power to the immense power of machines.
But as with earlier changes, Gombrich highlights the human cost, right?
Very much so. He details the devastating social impact. Skilled artisans, weavers who'd spent years learning their craft suddenly found themselves unemployed, their livelihoods destroyed by machines and factories.
Leading to widespread misery.
Exactly. The book describes the grim conditions in the new industrial cities. Poverty, terrible working conditions, child labor, long hours, despair. It paints a really bleak picture of the human cost of this rapid industrialization.
And this is the context for Karl Marx.
Precisely. Gombrich explains how this widespread misery and the stark division between the factory owners, the capitalists, the haves and the workers, the proletariat, the have-nots, fueled Karl Marx's ideas. His call for workers to unite, to fight for better conditions, and ultimately to overthrow the capitalist system and take ownership of the factories, the means of production themselves, aiming for a classless society.
And how did this industrialization connect to global politics?
Well, these newly industrialized nations, Britain first, then others like Germany, France, the US, needed two things: raw materials for their factories and markets to sell their huge output of manufactured goods. This led, as the book describes, to a fierce scramble for colonies in the late 19th century, mainly in Africa and Asia.
Creating competition and tension between the major powers.
Intense competition. Everyone wanted their place in the sun, their share of colonies and resources. This rivalry led to massive military buildups, complex alliances, basically setting the stage for a major conflict. Gombrich notes that newer industrial powers like Germany and Italy were particularly eager to catch up with Britain and France in acquiring colonies.
Which brings us, inevitably, to World War I.
Yes. The book describes the trigger, the assassination in Sarajevo in 1914 that ignited this powder keg, pitting the Central Powers, mainly Germany and Austria-Hungary, against the Entente powers, France, Britain, Russia, and later others.
And the nature of the war itself.
Horrifyingly new. Gombrich talks about the introduction of terrible weapons, poison gas, causing agonizing deaths. Tanks rolling relentlessly across battlefields turned into mud. Trench warfare, submarines, airplanes used for combat. The scale of killing was unprecedented. Millions lost their lives.
He also mentions the Russian Revolution happening during the war.
Right, Lenin and the Bolsheviks seizing power in 1917, taking Russia out of the war, and the eventual intervention of the United States, which helped tip the balance against Germany and Austria.
And the peace that followed?
Harsh, especially in Germany. The book notes the terms imposed at Versailles, where Germany was forced to accept sole blame for starting the war and paid massive reparations. And Gombrich adds a personal note here from the later edition. Ah yes, this is where he reflects back, decades later.
Exactly. In the final chapter, which he wrote much later, looking back over his life and the time since the first edition, he actually admits that he, like many others at the time, believed Germany was solely responsible for WWI. But looking back, he realizes he should have been more critical, checked the facts more carefully. It's a moment of real historical honesty from him.
That's quite remarkable for an author to admit that about his own earlier work. Or what else does he reflect on in that final chapter? He lived through so much more history after 1935.
He does. He talks about the sheer growth in population, thanks partly to science and medicine. But he also confronts the horrors of the Second World War, which obviously occurred after the book was first written. He speaks of the Holocaust, the systematic murder of millions of Jews across German-occupied Europe, calling it a monstrous crime.
How does he try to understand how such things could happen?
He points to the disappearance of tolerance in places like Germany, Italy, and Japan in the lead up to the war. This idea that people could be incited through propaganda and hatred to see others as less than human. He even draws this surprising but maybe insightful parallel to intolerance among school children, how easily groups can turn on someone different, engaging in hateful teasing and torment. It's about how easily, he suggests, human beings can be transformed into inhuman beings through incitement and intolerance, a deeply sobering reflection. So looking back over this whole incredible journey through a little history of the world, what really stands out for you? What were those aha moments, maybe, that you think will stick with our listeners? He really does manage to make history feel personal, doesn't he?
Absolutely. For me, one of the most powerful things is that recurring idea of human continuity. That notion he introduces right back in prehistory that people thousands of years ago were just like us, capable of the same good and the same evil. It grounds the whole narrative.
It stops history from feeling like it's just about distant, different beings.
Exactly. And his final insights are so important too. How history shapes who we are, our identity, and informs the choices we face going forward. And despite all the darkness he chronicles the wars, the cruelty there is that subtle thread of hope at the end, wouldn't you say?
I think so. He points to the real blessings of science, like advances in medicine and sanitation that have allowed so many more people to live longer, healthier lives.
And he notes the rise of international aid, how richer nations respond at least sometimes to crises like famine or earthquakes elsewhere. He observes that the conscience of the world, or at least of the richer nations, has become, in his words, a little more attentive. Maybe not enough, but a little more.
A little more attentive. It's a cautious optimism, perhaps. Gombrich wrote that he hoped for a better future, a future that he felt must be better than the past he'd lived through. So as we sort of flow into what he called the unknown, misty future, what responsibility does that leave us with, us as individuals who now know a little more of this history?
That's the big question, isn't it? How do we continue to foster that attentiveness he spoke of? How do we ensure that tolerance, reason, humanity, those Enlightenment ideals he valued prevail, especially when new challenges, new forms of intolerance inevitably arise?
It's a question Gombrich powerfully leaves us to ponder, and perhaps understanding the long, complex, sometimes difficult story of how we got here, as the book helps us do, is the first step in figuring that out.